Good afternoon, this is Tara McFarland, and you are entering the breakout session for the topics of climate change, flood damage mitigation, and data management. So I'm just going to give a few more minutes for people to switch rooms, but this, if you could see my screen, I've got the topics for today's breakout session in red squares. Okay, I will go ahead and get started. My name is Tara McFarland. I am with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the Office of Water Resources. And today we are going to be talking about climate change, the recommendations related to the flood damage mitigation, and the recommendations for data management. And I've also got Laura Kiefer on the line. She was the committee lead for the data management group. And I've got David Kristovich on the line, and he is the group leader for climate change. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to just give a brief overview of each topic and some of the highlighted recommendations to date. And then we'll open it up to general questions using the chat box. And we'll try to address those questions in the time remaining. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up to the website as a reminder to everybody that there is a task force website, and I'll provide the link in the chat box. And most of you are using that website to get to the sessions today. But just in case you didn't know, we do have a good summary of all the different topics. And there's some links up here for that video or slide presentation, however you'd like to view it. And then at the end, Wes just alluded to it, but I just want to remind you that at the end of today's meetings, you can either fill out the public survey, or if you have other specific questions, you're welcome to reach out and utilize our email link for additional comments. So I will go ahead and start our presentation. These were the slides that were provided.
13 key water issues.
Whoops, I didn't mean to actually play it, so I apologize. So let me go ahead and get out of this. So the first one was climate change. And when we look at climate change, David, did you want to go over a couple of the recommendations briefly, just to remind everybody what we're talking about today?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. The climate change impacts pretty much that are expected are all revolving around one fundamental issue, and that is that the precipitation regime that we've been in over the last 50, 100 years or so is changing. It's what we call a non-stationary climate. And that's something that there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and that's kind of the overall encompassing issue. For this report, there are some new current issues, I would say emerging uncertainties that get special attention right now, being flash drought, and whether or not flash drought is a rapidly evolving drought situation. And what would we expect the impacts of increasing frequency and intensity of flash droughts be? Rainfall seasonality, there's a fair amount of evidence now that the different seasons, the amount of rainfall that we're going to get is not going to be constant through the year. It's going to be different for different seasons, and that may affect a lot of different things, such as several aspects of agriculture and other water use issues. And land use. How might land use change the climate, both locally and on the large scale, as well as how does land use affect our ability to deal with changing precipitation amounts. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So some of our recommendations, and I'm not going to go through all these right now, but in an overall sense, our biggest recommendations at this point are that we need to make climate data more readily available, more easily understood, so that individual users can go in and actually look at the data and get summaries as well of what the different models are saying. Improve our communication of the risks of such climate change events, such as flash droughts and extreme heavy rainfalls. Better understand the relationships between the past and future seasonal rainfall. If we have a wet spring, does that mean necessarily we'll have a wet summer? I think we all know that's not at all a certainty. And we need to understand those relationships better. And how do we integrate societal needs in such a way that the climate processes are made in the most just way as possible? What kind of mitigation strategies can we make that balance all of the various issues? And improve our understanding of the impacts of winter climate changes, which has really not been dealt with a great deal. So it's an emerging issue that we think there should be more focus on. And below, at the bottom, we show a few specific areas of focus, such as agriculture, urban climate, and extreme weather, severe weather events. So I think that's a good place to stop for the moment.
Thank you. And again, we'll open it up at the end for questions specifically related to climate change. The only thing I wanted to maybe reiterate is that this climate change impacts all 12 of the other water issue topics for the State Water Plan. And that's how we're going to approach it, that this section is going to be talking about these recommendations in general, but if each topic has specific climate change recommendations or concerns, they will be also addressed in those individual sections.
Yeah,
So
thank you,
next,
Tara.
I wanted
That's
to
a
talk
good
about
point.
flood damage. Okay, thanks. Next, I will go ahead and talk about the flood damage mitigation. And the main purpose of our group is to reduce the negative impacts due to flooding. And we've divided our discussion into hazard identification and mitigation. So the recommendations and associated issues that were related to hazard identification go back to what David was just talking about. The long-term precipitation changes obviously are impacting flooding events and predictability of those events. So one of our recommendations is to utilize as much information as we can and incorporate that into our projections. Another issue is that we have a lot of hydraulic and hydrology models for the state, but many are outdated. We need to be able to pull in that new data from the climate change and come up with a way to do some more non-regulatory modeling. There's a lot more information and data out there that, for those that are familiar, the FEMA modeling process is quite lengthy and it's a long review process. So we're hoping to develop some new ways to do some faster, quick turnover modeling that can be used by the decision makers when they're determining where to spend their funding, as well as determining where the best mitigation dollars can be spent. Another issue is as technology advances, we definitely want to update our flood hazard and prediction tools, provide additional inundation mapping throughout the state, and continue to do structural damage assessments, again, to help us determine where to focus our efforts. And then another issue is related to equity, and that we would like to, we're finding that we would like to have some sort of disclosure for property sales, both for sewer backup and for if you're in a floodplain, and providing additional mapping so that all community members can be aware of potential flood hazards. And our next issue was related to mitigation, and we have a lot of mitigative infrastructure and ideas being incorporated throughout the state, but we want to provide upgrades to some of those existing infrastructure and also develop new flood protection projects. And we would like to focus on socioeconomically disadvantaged areas. And then we also want to focus a little bit more on natural systems infrastructure mitigation. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of communities out there that might need additional guidance for grants and to get the information so that they can get the funding that they might need to do some of those watershed level projects. And then we also want to provide incentives to communities for partnering, because we're finding that's a great tool for sharing resources and knowledge bases to optimize the benefits for different groups. And then we also have some longer term recommendations that we just want to put in the report, that we really feel that there's a lot of funding opportunities out there, but there's a lot of different entities involved, and we want a little bit more coordination amongst those entities to help, again, some of those communities that are having trouble getting funding have a better understanding and get on different lists for those funding resources. And then some long-term mitigation efforts are related to just really have a good understanding of what a database of all the infrastructure out there, and some sort of a prioritization of where the best use of our dollars might be in the future, again, focusing on socioeconomic and vulnerable areas. And then lastly, we definitely want to make sure communities get some, we might need to update some regulations and standards, but we want to allow and incentivize green design for some of our long-term mitigation efforts. So next, I'll go ahead and open it up to Laura to give an overview of the data management topic.
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, stream data, a lot of the climate change is really a cross-cutting issue. It supplies and underpins a lot of important data that is needed for several of the other critical topics, such as, flooding hazard, water sustainability, water quality, aquatic habitat. You could go down the list. And stream data can be either water level information or discharge or flow volume. So just making sure that's defined for everyone. The committee, based on the 3 issues that we determined in the first phase, came up with 3 recommendations. The first one, based on the issue that trying to make sure that we have enough stream gauges, that it was found that there really is not enough of them in rural areas or smaller sized watersheds. These watersheds react differently from watershed to watershed as opposed to large rivers. And these shifts in climate to more extreme rainfall events and flash droughts makes it really important to have real-time stream flow or water level data. So the other recommendation was to maintain current long-term continuous monitoring stations, one that we already have, as well as not to lose any more stations. Of course, we would like to increase stations as well, but the basic tenet is that the long data sets are needed to really determine some trends and inform a lot of resource managers and policymakers in order to make plans for sustaining resources in the future. And as long as we maintain the current shorter term stations, is an investment in turning them into future long-term data records that can also be used. I know we're always wanting data, but it's really key in so many of these issues that are being mentioned in the state water plan. And finally, really based on the fact that there's just not enough money to go around for one agency to really have all stations meeting everyone's needs, that we're recommending the formation of a working group to evaluate current stream data networks within the state. These assessing the expanding needs of federal, state, and local entities that already have their own data, that we can develop from there an idea of what can be met, what cannot, make recommendations, but really not just for the sense of just evaluating it, but to actually develop a business plan that would leverage, coordinate, seek funding, and promote support for what we're proposing as a statewide stream data collaborative. And that would be a long-term effort to sustain a stream gauging network. It's thought of that this is could be a key piece in the recommendation in the integrated management plan for what's being proposed as the Illinois Flood Center to be developed within the Prairie Research Institute at the U of I. So this would be an underpinning and providing overall information to many of those other needs. That's all I have.
Thanks, Laura. So I open it up right now to questions. If it's easier for you to enter it in the chat box, that should be on your screen. My screen looks different because I'm sharing my screen. But we're a fairly small group, so if somebody just wants to go ahead and unmute themselves and ask a question to the group, that would be fine as well. While I'm waiting for questions, I did put the link to the task force website in the chat box, just for if anyone has not been able to find that yet.
Tara, this is Joe Arguzes. I guess I guess the only comment I have is that we probably do need to, and maybe I'm stating the obvious, tie this into what funding sources can be available and how best to coordinate information. It just seems like there's so many threads out there that tying it into funding sources and how to tie those various bits of information into a cohesive.
Sure, Joe,
Yeah.
I understand. And I think as the report develops, the plan is for each recommendation to have an explanation if they need to have any regulatory changes or give a rough range of costs associated with these recommendations. And ultimately, this report will go to the General Assembly. And the idea was that each topic selects their highest priority issues. And those are the issues that we are suggesting should be top of the class to get funded. And then from there, some groups and some committees are coming up with some alternative funding, some collaborative projects using community support, as well as being funded by some nonprofit organizations. And so it won't all be funded by the state if there are other ways and recommendations for other funding resources. But that's a good point, Joe, that there are a lot of issues, a lot of recommendations, and most of them will require some sort of funding or sharing of information. You're welcome to add anything more to that comment if you'd like.
No, I think You said what I was mumbling about very succinctly, so thank you for doing that. You also said something though that I hadn't really thought about that in terms of nonprofits or other organizations, particularly when with a focus on some social justice issues. That's something I kind of hadn't thought about at all. That's interesting that, some local communities might be sorely pressed uh, economically, and that having some other funding sources to call on is that's something I hadn't thought about at all. That's something we should I'd like to think about. So that's a very good point. Thanks.
Sure, and I just wanted to add, I'm going to bring back up my slide. When I talked about this guidance group, we actually want to form a guidance group made up of experts, and that would be within the states and also some of these nonprofits. There's a huge group of knowledgeable people out there within their communities, and they've been coming to us with some great ideas. And we want to incorporate some of those interesting ideas and new public partnerships to move forward. But I don't know, Laura or David, did you have anything you wanted to add about funding?
Well, that was something I was kind of addressing in our third recommendation for the stream data management, is really trying to be cognizant of the fact that we can't lean on the USGS to do all the data collection and the investment in that infrastructure, and that there are others, including ourselves, that are have some specific data that we need to start talking about leveraging some of those resources. But that I think funding to not only bring some of that to fruition, but again, trying to really concentrate on those areas that are economically depressed and have been impacted by water resources in not very good ways, to get that infrastructure that they couldn't afford themselves, and then that brings data and information and able for them to be able to get grants to modify their infrastructure and improve their own conditions. So, but that's the thought behind the collaborative, and that there's no one-stop shopping anymore, that we have to get clever and really have to work together.
Sure. If I
Thanks,
could also
Laura.
if I could also add a little bit, Tara and Laura have both brought up some really great opportunities and places that we have to look, which are outside of the traditional, base funding that we're used to thinking about. For climate change, you could view it as either an advantage or a disadvantage, that it's really a global issue. Sorry about the noise here. It's a bit of a global issue that has local impacts, and because of that, we can often leverage some of our federal funding to help out with some of the efforts and recommendations that we're proposing, at least for the research side. So that's just another aspect of creative ways that I think we have to go after these issues.
Thanks, David. And the other thing, I just can't remember where I had talked about it. I think it was more mitigation, both long-term and short-term. We would like to see some sort of incentivization for economically disadvantaged or other equitable social justice areas that may have been ignored in the past. And when it comes to funding with grants and providing, I don't know, when you select your grant recipients, we're thinking there could be additional points for some of these vulnerable areas. and that might help bring forward some of those funding resources to the places that need it the most. So does anyone have any other questions? I think we're probably preaching to the choir here with this group. I think several of you are already on our some of our committees, but is there anything that you guys see that in those other categories that you might not be on the committee that strike you as something? One thing Laura and I came up with, that some of the different topics have very similar and overarching recommendations, and we're hopeful that the groups can get together in the upcoming months and talk about how even amongst the topics there might be ways to share some of the same types of ideas with each other and collaborate a little bit more.
Tara, that's a very good point. I think the more we can cross-pollinate, the better off we are. At the very beginning, though, changing the subject a little bit, very beginning, you had mentioned there was a survey to be filled out. Is that link on the website that you provided before, or is there a special place we need to go for that?
Yes, Joe, the link to the website is in the chat box, and I will go back to the website. And this is the beginning of the State Water Plan Task Force website. And if you just slide down a little bit, there's a place called Public Surveys. And there's a public survey that has pre-populated questions and lots of room for input. And that's a great place to start. But if those trigger additional comments or questions that you might have, you can also directly email the task force through this website. I can go ahead and copy that and put it in the chat room. If I can figure out how to share my screen again. But Joe, does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. And actually that brings us, again, if you have any other questions, but Wes alluded, we do have some upcoming dates. We're at the public outreach right now. You have until June 25th to submit public comments. And then we're going to be all pulling our all those comments together for all the different topics and developing a draft report that will be available for public review. And we are anticipating to have a public outreach in November for that draft report and pull again any comments that we receive and input and publish the report by the end of this year. And again, if you want any questions in the chat room, I will just recommend there is another meeting just like this tomorrow. If somebody that you know might be interested, please go ahead and send them the link to that website and the links to these meetings. And another area that while you're thinking of your public comments, the focus of this public outreach was about recommendations. So each group last time we had our public outreach was looking at the actual issues or concerns related to our topic. And then we took those and went to the next level with recommendations. So is there something really striking that you think was overlooked by any of these groups? Or if you think that you can enhance a recommendation that's something that we didn't think about, or if you disagree with any of the recommendations. So be thinking a little bit like that when you're sending your comments. Well, this room will be open for another 10 minutes, and then when at 2:50, we'll go ahead and shut this room down, and you can go back to that first room that you went to for the introduction. But in the meantime, I will leave this room open for any other questions. So I'll stay silent. Hopefully I'm not intimidating any questions by talking too much.
Hey Tara, it's Rick Pullman from OWR. If I could ask,
Yeah.
and as we move through the next set of public outreach here, maybe it would be beneficial to explain the next steps as we move forward, just as a conversational piece. As we get into final report development and such, time frame and those related activities.
Sure, that's a great idea. And I think I maybe abbreviated the schedule here a little bit in these steps. But again, another resource to what Rick is alluding to is the website. We do have, and I'll just mention that we do have links from the outreach session phase 1. We recorded all the meetings, and all those links are on the website. But if you go a little bit further, again, there's all the different categories, topics, as well as the lead individuals, and you are welcome to reach out to any of those leads in their emails if you have questions. But the overall project schedule, again, there's 3 main phases of the project, and the first was identifying the main issues, and we're done with that phase. And now we're in the developing the recommendations phase, and we're at that public outreach period. And then, as I suggested, we're going to take those comments and provide finalize our recommendations for the whole task force, and again, meet and collaborate and make sure that we're all sort of on the same page with how we're providing our recommendations and making sure we're all addressing the main issues. And then the final report phase is the group will come together and take each one of these topics, and it will be a chapter in this report. And then the report itself will be combined and provided for public input. But I think the other thing I wanted to add is that this website will be a key resource in the future as well, because we recognize that, that this state water plan has been around for a very long time. I'm going to go ahead and pull down a little bit more. Our first state water plan was developed in 1967, and there were various special reports and updates for that state water plan through time, and all those reports are on the webpage. But we also recognize that reports are great, and we want to go ahead and really update this report every 5 years. That's the plan from here forward. But we also want this to be interactive, and as things get completed, we want to show the progress. We want to update this website and show the citizens of the state what work is being completed and how it's being completed. And we want it to be a little bit more of a live, interactive process. So we're still working on those details, but just keep your eye out. And in the future, I think we plan to really pull in more live reporting of how progress is being made. So any questions remaining? And Rick, if you wanted to add anything more about the future of the project or how it's being developed, let me know, or go ahead, because I'd like to know what else I could explain better.
Well, I think you did a nice job there. I appreciate that. I think many may have be fairly aware of those next steps, but I appreciate you walking through that. And I know there was a comment as well about associating the work with a funding source, or at least identifying the need that many of the items and efforts that we're identifying here moving forward will require some type of a revenue source to support. So that becomes the next piece as well, that the summation of the report is then used to identify how this work is funded, and we're able to implement the recommendations with an associated type of funding as we work with our legislative partners to do that. So I think, again, your summation is very helpful in identifying how we see this moving forward, and then what the report is then used to do to implement the programs and efforts that have been determined as needed by the group. So thank you for that review.
Thanks, Rick. And I do want to add, we did have a gentleman that was on the task force who's recently retired, and through various state water plans over time, and he worked for EPA, and he said a lot of the programs that he worked on over the last 10 or 15 years all really came out of the state water plan and the recommendations in the state water plan, and they became priorities for his agency. So that was really encouraging, and I'm guessing that is where we'd like to see this go. As I said, this report will go to the General Assembly, and to get those funding allocations, as well as any regulation changes. Those will hopefully move forward, and because these are the highlights of a lot of different experts and agencies and community members out there, these are the issues that people in the state have identified as needing work.
That's exactly right. We're vetting the process now, so this is critical to have the stakeholder input, the collaborative discussion, and it certainly will drive future programs, as was identified with the gentleman who has recently retired. So it's critical. It's a critical effort. So we're looking forward to moving this forward and advancing programs to support the work. Exactly.
Okay, I will go ahead and leave this room open, but at any point, you can go ahead and move back to that first group, the intro link on the web page. I'll go ahead and pull you back up there. If you go back to Wednesday's intro link, you'll go back, and we're going to go ahead and do a wrap up where we all talk about the discussions, give a little summary of what occurred in each of the breakout rooms.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Laura. I sort of took over, didn't I, Laura? I'm sorry.
That was fine by me.
Well, it's good to know you're there if I get laryngitis, or
Yeah, no problem.
We'll try again tomorrow.
Yep.
Hopefully, again, not much input, but most of those people were on my committee, but
Yeah.
oh well, at least they're interested.
Yeah, it's still not
Thanks.
as large of a group as we've had for the first sessions.
No, and I know a lot of those environmental groups did a really big plug for that first one. So maybe they just didn't get their outreach efforts as strong this time. I'm not sure. Or they felt that I almost thought more would come if they didn't think we were addressing things adequately,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
you know?
we're
But
doing what we're doing, so there'll probably be a lot of comment towards the end, though. I bet you that.
yeah, I'm sure you know you don't please everybody. But all right, thanks, Laura.
Yeah, yeah. I'll see you in the other meeting.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.